What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the eCommerce Influence Podcast. My name's Austin Brawner.
And I'm Andrew Foxwell. And, I tell you, the video on this is actually a lot of fun. And you also, though, get to see both of our COVID hair, I would say. That's hair, yeah. That's really where we're at right now, which is, it's kind of out of control. Kind of like me. I feel like I'm out of control right now.
You're getting wild over there.
Yeah, getting
During
totally
quarantine, you're getting crazy? Is that what's happening over there?
Getting crazy, right? I mean, we're talking 8 p.m. bedtimes. We're talking, taking walks. We're talking getting groceries delivered. I mean, it's really off the chain over here.
Well, good, man. I feel very similarly. My routine has been pretty dialed in this quarantine. I go back and forth between like feeling very excited about how dialed in my routine is to like needing a complete overhaul of that. And it's just been interesting. One of this episode today, this episode series has actually been inspired by some of the events that have been going on. And what, ultimately, right, we're in this time when we're seeing massive change and we're seeing businesses that are booming. We're also seeing a lot of businesses that have gone from have dropped 90% in sales. Not as much in the e-commerce side, but there are companies and clients I've worked with that have dropped 90%. And that's kind of the inspiration was conversations we've been having with our clients.
Yeah. I mean, now, as you said, now more than ever, people are thinking about profitability, and this profitability series or profit series is going to cover how to make your business more profitable. That's really what our goal is. Yeah. Because I think that these times necessitate that. They necessitate thinking about profitability, thinking about the greater picture around profitability, and even things like, what do you define as profitability? and going through that. So that's really what the episode today is about, which is kind of road mapping a process. And Austin put together a really incredible 5-step process of kind of walking towards creating a roadmap for profitability.
Yeah. And before we get into that specifically, there's a great question on Twitter this week that I saw from Eric Bandholtz. It said, would you rather own a $20 million business with 5% net profits or a $4 million business that has 25% net profits? Right? And that spurred a ton of people chiming in and very strong opinions on both sides of it. When ultimately, what's interesting about that is if you run the numbers, they both are taking home the same amount, which is $1 million in profit every single year. So that inspired me. I was like, I had a strong opinion on that. And that my strong opinion is I'd rather have the $4 million business at 25% net profits.
Right.
And Andrew, I don't know where you fall in on this.
I mean, we agree, right? More money, more problems, in my opinion. Why wouldn't you have a simpler model that has more cushion, frankly, and more flexibility, as we were talking about before the episode? As you said, I agree. I completely agree with you. I think that's totally what I would do, because bigger is definitely not always better in complications with business and profitability, for sure.
It's an interesting question. And I've heard somebody else, I think it was like Mike Michalowicz or somebody like that, wrote a book. And he talks about revenue is like stress. So the more revenue you have, there's more overall stress. And obviously there's more opportunity as well because it's more revenue. But that kind of dives into the first step of this, which is if you're looking at your business and you want to build a more profitable, fulfilling business, I think step number 1 is to really make the decision to view your profits as success versus revenue. Because we see in this industry, revenue is a crazy vanity metric that is freaking everywhere, and people are screenshotting Shopify. I know that. You go crazy on Twitter. You're not as much on Twitter. You're not going as crazy on Twitter as other people are when you see these crazy revenue numbers. But
right.
Let's talk about that. Like we see that all the time.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, as you said, making the decision to view profit as the main thing is really important. I guess my question to you, to turn it back on you a little bit, is like, how do you actually define profit? I mean, there's a clear like answer to that, maybe, but like when somebody says to you, like, I want my company to be more profitable, because in full transparency, right? Like what we do at Foxwell Digital, we do a lot with Facebook and Instagram ads and social ads, and like that's really where we are. And you do a lot with looking at overall business structure, looking at overall businesses, and something that you really help people. And so when somebody brings this up to you, like, where do you even start? Like, how do you define profit? Like, where are they looking for this?
So what I would describe that is net profit or net income, which are the same thing. So at the end of the day, right, after all expenses, after paying yourself, after paying all your employees, after paying for inventory, the amount that the business is actually profiting. You've got the difference between gross income and gross profit, which are the same thing, and net income and net profit, which are the same thing. Just the profit and income are the different terms that different accountants might use, and that can be a little bit confusing for people. But ultimately, at the end of the day, when I look at profits, I'm not looking at gross profit because it doesn't include expenses. I'm looking at net, which is minus all expenses, minus all your marketing, all the things that you're doing. That is, at the end of the day, what actually matters. And that's where kind of I focus my time.
I mean, when people go into that, like my question is like, are you actually, let me back up. Before you start this process, is it sometimes the first time people have actually done this in earnest? How often does that occur, that it's actually like some of the first time that they've actually looked at everything in relation to the business? Because I feel like the only time that happens in a lot of cases in the clients we've had that conversation with is like their accountant will go through it. And we've had instances where people are advertising and then they like meet with an accountant and then they email us and they're like, stop advertising, we're losing money. I'm like, that's not my problem. Like, so is it often that happens to you, or is that not that often, or people want clarification around it?
Rarely ever.
Okay.
You mean like between profits and like net profit and gross profit?
That they have a misunderstanding of like how much money they're actually making, I guess.
I think very often people don't understand how much money they're making, or they don't have systems set up around bookkeeping. Sure. So that they might not know what they actually made until like a month and a half after they made it, and at that point it's already too late.
Yeah, right? Interesting. Sure.
And yeah, I think like as you're getting rolling, right, it can be challenging because you understand day in and day out what your revenue numbers are, but it's harder to calculate your profit until the end of the month, or like the way we do it every single week, right? So we have a weekly rhythm. So we understand how much we're making every single week, but that took some time and a system to set up. But back to like the point is like, it's super sexy to say you've got a ton of revenue. Yes. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're making any money. In fact, many businesses aren't making any money.
Right. And I think this is an important thing of like, of understanding who really are the listeners to this podcast. Right. And I think that the listeners to this podcast are people that have made that decision or are wanting to make that decision to view profit, not the revenue as success. So I think that's a great, that's a mind shift, and that's a great first part of the process. Going to the second part you have is set a profitability goal for the business. How do you go about this, setting a profitability goal? And is it different by industry, or what's your take on it?
So really good question. And it's something where I feel like this is the point where what you mentioned last time, where people start to get like a little bit hung up, or like the questions start coming. It's like, okay, well, what is a good profitability goal for the business, and how do I track that? How do I think about that? The way that I think about it is I look at, like mentioned earlier, like pre-tax net income or pre-tax net profit. Again, they're exactly the same thing. And that is the amount of money that you make after everything, all the expenses are paid. And, you know, this one thing that is often, I think is a misconception, is that people will say, well, right now we're going for growth. We're just going to run the business at break even. And the challenge with that is that if you're running the business at break even, you're one bad month or one bad quarter away from going out of business.
Yeah.
And we can see that right now, because one of my clients who I have believed for the longest time was running the coolest, most recession-proof business, incredibly profitable. They happened to be exposed to events and lost like 90% of their revenue.
Oof.
Almost impossible to predict. Like by all measurements, this was the most bulletproof company that I've worked with. So it can happen to anybody. And so the idea of running at break even and just focusing on growth is a dangerous game to play, because you're only a couple months away from getting wiped out. So what I look at is a nice balance between growth and profit. And kind of what I'm targeting, if you're running a business that's trying to grow fast and you want to invest back in the business, somewhere between 10 and 15% of your pre-tax net income, 10 to 15% of your pre-tax net income should be profit. So that means 15% of your, so say you make $1 million.
Okay.
Then 15% of that should be your goal for your profits. Okay. So $1 million, 15% of that is 150,000, I believe. No, is that right? Yes.
Mm-hmm. 150,000. Yes. Correct.
What's that? Yeah. So make $1 million, $150,000. That'd be 15%, and that would be your profitability goal. That gives you a nice balance between investing in the business and also having enough buffer in case things go poorly.
Yeah, there's a client that that we had for about a year, and then another colleague had for about a year, and his was always break even. That was always his goal, break even, and he's continued to scale. And since we transferred him onto a partner because they were getting too big, and then the partner was with them for a year or so. Anyway, and then they left them. And now they've been to 3 other agencies after this partner, and it's because they're out of that runway, and now they're just discounting all the time, and the profitability goal is not like something that I don't think they thought about that, and they just were always at break even, and they're like, they saw the revenue number. And it's just dangerous territory, especially in today's economy, for sure. And I think it's relevant anytime, right? I think it's just a smart business decision to have that cushion there, as you said. So I think that's great. Set a profitability goal for the business. 15%, that's growth. What would be not growth? What would be more like a safer one, like just 20, 25%? What's more common for people that have been around for a while?
I think 15% is like a pretty safe.
It's safe. 15% safe. Okay.
Safe goal. We'll go into like capitalization and how much you actually need to keep in the business a little bit.
Sure.
And I think that's more related to like safety versus business health.
Okay.
But if you're somewhere in that range, right? Like if you're between 10 and 25% of your, the only difference between like an income goal, a profit goal of 10% pre-tax net income or 25%. And what I mean by this, to be really, really clear, is having a goal that if you make $1 million, you're going to have 25% at the end is going into profits after you pay yourself and all those different things. And again, this has got to be really, really clear. You have to have a market-based wage included in that for yourself. Or the business, and I see this quite often. A business is like, oh yeah, we're profitable, and then they're not paying the founder, who's doing all the roles at once.
That's not included in the expenses generally that they'll have.
Often it won't be included in the expenses.
Okay, I hear it a lot, but I don't dive in as much as you do, so that makes a lot of sense, and it's also kind of sad, really.
Well, yeah, it's like well, yeah, business is profitable, and then you're like, okay, well, you're paying yourself $20,000 a year when. To replace you'd have to pay $200,000 because of all the stuff you do, and that's that. And then that turns the business from a profitable business to a not profitable business.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. So let's go onto the third one then of
Yep.
set a capitalization goal for the business. What does this mean? How do you go about doing this?
So what this means is that you want, so sometimes people ask, like, how much money should the business have in the bank at all times?
Yeah.
And you had a great question earlier, which is like, does this vary by industry? Does this vary by like type of business? And it really, really does, right? Like my business is very, very consistent. I think your business is pretty consistent as well. It's not like not seasonal. We don't, have to hold tons of inventory or buy tons of inventory. So because of that, it's recurring based. I don't need to hold as much capital in my business to make up for the times when we're not going to be making money. If I have a seasonal business, I need to have more money because the massive swings with the business will lead you to have to spend a lot of money up front to make a lot of money on the back end.
Right.
So for my business, I try to keep like 3 to 4 months of all expenses in the business. So I take all the expenses that we pay every single month, make an average of the last 3 months and say, okay, this is what we on average spend. That includes how much I pay myself, my team, rent, software, all that sort of stuff. And I multiply it by 4, and that's my capitalization goal. If you don't have a very seasonal business, somewhere between 4 and 6 months is a good kind of range, I think, about the amount of money. And that means if you have, $50,000 of expenses every single month, including how much you pay yourself, you multiply that by 4 to 6, and that's your capitalization goal.
Okay.
If your business, on the other hand, is super seasonal, and I've worked with a bunch of clients like this that are in one of them is in a seasonal planner business that is great business, but super seasonal because people are buying planners for the year,
right?
Organizers one time, or around the time. So
right.
You got to buy all your inventory and prepare for this time, and then you sell like crazy. You make all your money back, but you need to have a ton of money in the bank to work through the times of the year when people aren't spending.
That is super helpful, and I think makes a lot of sense. And I had always heard around capitalization goal. I'd always heard of it 4 months as well. So good to know. I've listened to a lot of business stuff. I've never heard this talked about. So this is actually really helpful because I'm like, oh, that's good. But that makes a lot of sense in terms of having that. And then if it's longer, if it's seasonal, which is,
I would go up to like 12 months if it's seasonal,
right? Because
like
you don't
have
know
an entire year.
Yeah, right. You have no idea. That's interesting. Okay, cool. So make a decision. 5-step process. I always love reviewing things. Helps me go through them. Make a decision to view profit, not revenue, as a success. Number 1. Number 2, set a profitability goal for the business. Number 3, set a capitalization goal for your business. And then number 4, you have get real with yourself, set a salary cap, and make tough cuts, which tough cuts sounds like an awesome lawn mowing business name, by the way.
Tough cuts. Great. That actually is a great one.
What's a salary cap in your, and then, I assume this means that you'll be cutting your own salary or staff, or what do you mean by this in terms of getting real with yourself?
So what I mean is once you've gone through and what typically happens is it takes a long time to turn businesses around and get them more profitable. I mean, it can happen fast if there's a lot of waste, but ultimately, like, running a profitable business over time requires consistency and small changes that you do, small little habits that you do over time to get more profitable. And so what often happens is that people go in, they set a profitability goal, and they're like, this is how much we want to make at the end of the year. And then they set a goal for how much they need to keep in the business. And that may be like, all right, we need 150 grand in the accounts. We want to make 15% pre-tax net income. So that's our goal. And then at that point, you got to have this come to Jesus moment where you're like, well, we are not on our trajectory.
Sure.
We are nowhere close to our trajectory.
Sure.
And we have these goals. So now we have to make the cuts, and you have to think about, well, can you look at your expenses and get a reasonable, we generally are going to have an idea of what our expenses are like, right? Mm-hmm. Like maybe it's a warehouse, maybe some rent. You've got obviously software, but you have all these expenses that you kind of already know. And so you're going to take that and you're going to think about your goal for the amount of revenue you're going to make. And then you're going to look at the amount of expenses that you have and that you expect to spend during that time. And then you're going to look at your goal of pre-tax net income, whatever you decide is right for your business. And there's going to be a disconnect between the amount that you have that you're paying out in salary, typically, because that's a place that is usually there's usually a lot of money in our types of businesses, in small e-commerce businesses that typically they're pretty lean, sure. But then there's salary. So that's where you have to make a decision about how you're going to hire going forward. Mm-hmm. You might be in the range and you might not have to make any changes, or you might be in a position where you're way overspending on salary. You can't be profitable. So you have to make cuts in that range. That could be to your own salary, or that could be to your team. But the way I would really look at it is a salary cap. The idea behind that is that you have a specific amount of money that you're able to manage your team going forward. So you may have for the year like $250,000 in quote unquote salary that you can distribute. And your goal is to get the best people on the team for that amount of money.
Got it.
So that's how you kind of manage a salary cap. And you're trying to set it up, and again, all market-based wages. That's really, really important, because if you don't have market-based wages, you're just running an arbitrage, and eventually it's going to catch up with you, at least in my experience.
Sure.
And that a market-based wage, what does it look like? That changes in different countries and all those different things, but it's based on the market. So just thinking about not trying to, if you're underpaying people, they're going to go somewhere else eventually.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, in the conversations that we've had about this, we've been asked about it occasionally, and not super often in terms of staff salary. We get asked about it a lot in terms of like the paid social person. What do you pay this person?
Yeah.
And I always know that I'm speaking with someone that I want to work with longer term when they're asking me that question and they say, I have budgeted X amount for this person versus versus I would say it's more common, maybe 70% of the time, that I get somebody coming and saying, what do I pay this person? I could pay them between $50,000 and $150,000. And I'm like, that's a huge range. And it shows that they haven't set a salary cap. So that makes a ton of sense, and like a kind of understanding what that number is and how you're going to take care of it to make sure that you retain people, which is obviously a major issue in a lot of different businesses, and something we've talked about on this podcast that you do a lot with, helping people hire good people and helping them not only source good people, but keep them around and retain them. So
it also forces you to get scrappy.
You keep them happy, right?
You get scrappy if you only have a certain amount. If you're growing,
right,
and you're like, all right, this is the amount that we can actually spend
right.
on salary. But we're growing, we need help.
Right.
We got to get scrappy. We got to figure out how to make this happen, and to maintain profitability, so that, because again, profit equals freedom in my mind.
Right.
You could use that money for whatever you want to do, and that could be incentivize your team, right? Lavishly. If people are working super hard and you've got profits, you can give back and make it so that their work environment is better.
Well, I always think about too, to me, it's surprising, I guess, the number of e-commerce businesses that I come in contact with that have a contractor that's running a huge part of the show. And that could be ops, that could be social, that could be, a number of things. And you look at somebody like, I think a great example is you look at someone like Matt and Meredith from Boardwalk T-shirts, who have always invested in the people and have really cared about the people in that company.
Yeah.
And they don't they don't make themselves feel like we're the founders. You must listen to us, like the supreme leader thing. I mean, they're very transparent. They're honest with them. And I think that that's why they retain people better, because they care about them and they also interview the right way.
Exactly.
And they pay them fairly too, which is interesting. So as you said, keeping people happy is a huge one. On to your the fifth one of the 5-step process. Go forward using the 3 levers to drive profitable growth. So what are the 3 levers to drive profitable growth from the Austin Brawner method?
This is not, this is my method. This is like
I'm calling
business,
it your method.
right?
Yeah, no, this is I just I love to name things, like the tough cuts method.
It's
that,
my method.
We could trademark that. It's good stuff.
I should just call it my method. But no, this is what we're going to be talking about for the rest of this series, which is the different ways you can drive growth in your business. And I think that, so the 3 ways are increase customers, increase average order value, increase lifetime value.
I am so excited to talk about these 3, by the way. Like,
it's going to be good.
So much fun stuff to get into. It's tactical, strategic. I mean, I think I put a thing in our Facebook group about this, and it's had 25 replies in less than 24 hours about things that people do to increase average order value, as an example.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's just a little to whet your appetite there. I think
let's dive into it for a second. I think that the reason why, when we look at profitable versus non-profitable growth, often the non-profitable growth just focuses on one lever, which is increasing customers. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's also like go to the customer store, Facebook, and just spend and drive more customers, without thinking about, if you're trying to run a more profitable business, the other levers.
Oh my gosh. I mean, you think about the times that you and I've run into businesses that they do like a free kit, right? And the risk with the free kit thing, you get customers, that's their lever for for growth. Yeah. But there's no, the follow-ups aren't dialed in, and yeah, you have a lot of customers, but like, is that business profitable? Like, maybe not, I'm not saying every one of them that does a free kit is like this, but it's harder certainly to go on that method. And that's not a very sustainable way to grow, in my opinion, if you have a lot of cash.
Exactly. And you don't want to play in a pond where all the other fish have more money than you. And
yeah, right.
What I mean by that is, like, you're advertising against venture-backed companies that have massive amounts of cash. They're just blasting Facebook and spending there. So you got to be smart, and you got to think about the other levers that you can play, and that's figuring out how to increase average order value and increase lifetime value. And that's what we're going to talk about on the rest of this series. We're going to go into individual breakdowns of each lever, how to think about it, how to become more profitable. And I'm excited. So this is kind of the framework, because like I mentioned this earlier, but I think we are very aligned on this, which is profit equals freedom.
Oh, absolutely.
And freedom can be defined in whatever way that you want. But that's what it is in my mind.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that's really why people listen to this podcast, because I think it aligns with them thinking about that. And when we get into these types of episodes where we're looking at the greater business, we had the scaling series that, if you've not listened to that, I definitely recommend listening to that, of how do you really grow a business? How do you really scale it? That was inspired by you getting a lot of questions, which is a lot of times people coming into the community, to the coalition community, and saying, how do I scale? How do I grow? And I think the profitability one is really the next perfect deep dive on it. Because ultimately that does lead to freedom. And ultimately that's, I think, why a lot of us own our businesses or started it in the first place. And we want you to not be trapped in that. So we'll look forward to having you listen on the other episodes. But if you like this episode, we'd love to hear your feedback as well. Feel free to let us know.
Tag us on Twitter That's probably the best place. Hit us up on Twitter.
You just said tag us. You almost made it sound like you're like the Wu-Tang Clan saying like tag us style.
Tag us style.
That's what I thought you were going.
Tag us
I didn't know where that was headed. But just tag us on Twitter.
Tag us on Twitter. Just hit us up and let us know what you think. And next episode will be coming out in a couple weeks. Talk to you guys soon.